going to today's agenda, which is officially Influence Empire, the story of Tencent and China's tech ambition. We have a wonderful speaker, author, and also a fellow journalist, Lulu Chen. But before I make the introduction, we'll let the record show that this entire event was put together obviously by our wonderful FCC staff, but also my board member colleague Rebecca Bailey. So I'm just a talking head who gets to do the fun part. Unfortunately, she couldn't be here today, but let the record show that this was her event. But our speaker today, Lulu Chen, she's currently Bloomberg's Asia team leader for investing and real estate. She has covered China and its technology landscape for more than a decade for Bloomberg News and Bloomberg Business Week. She's a multiple co-winner of the Society of Publishers in Asia Award. Welcome to the Foreign Correspondents Club, and thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you for having me here.
Yeah. Well, why don't we go straight? You have just book published, and this conversation is based on. So not only is this a lunch talk, but this is also a book talk. So let's start with the most obvious question: what inspired you to write this book, and then what did you wish to achieve with the book?
Right. So for the audience here, many of you are wondering, when does your 5 cents become 10 cents again? The reason I wrote this book, something relevant for the audience here. One is I wanted to explore partly what it means to be an entrepreneur in China. The other thing is that if you've read the book, large chunks of it go through what I describe as this golden age for China internet, and it's a recording or a documentary of an era that is quickly fleeting, and I wanted to record it before people forget that actually at one point China did welcome, if not even worship, the entrepreneur, and there were these gladiators in their own profession in creating business operations, like how The Guardian described it as they've achieved capitalist supremacy out of a Communist Party base, which is quite surprising to many, and I thought their stories were worth telling. And the final thing that's relevant is that we're going through another down cycle again. The investors, CEOs I've talked to in the past few weeks, very few have said that they don't expect a recession to hit. And if you look at the companies that I describe in this book, many of them were founded during recessions, or they survived recessions to become the giants that they later became. So maybe hopefully you can take away something from their stories and their struggles in the early days in founding these companies.
Okay. Before we go into the, is your 5 cents going to become 10 cents as well? I'm going to try to translate that in Finnish somehow and use it somewhere. But before we go to that, could you just give us an overview just how incredibly a massive and influential company Tencent is? Foreigners like myself, of course, we know the WeChat and the gaming companies, but just how influential is Tencent in today's China?
Yeah, it's. Some might find Tencent's operations confusing, but if you don't know anything about the company, it's easier to just break it down by revenue and focus on where they're getting their revenue. And by that sense, then traditionally Tencent made all of the majority of its income through gaming. So it is a very powerful gaming company for non-gamers. If you have teenage sons or daughters, Fortnite, Overwatch, Rainbow Six Siege, Clash of Clans, League of Legends, these are some titles that you might have heard of, and Tencent has stakes. If not, they own the majority of the shares in the companies that make these games. The other part of the company is its social media platforms, namely QQ and WeChat. And QQ was they hit gold. That was their first big breakout product during the PC era. WeChat helped them survive the mobile internet era and made them really big and made them really this all-encompassing the service that really infiltrated all aspects of people's lives in China.
But if we look at their different revenue streams, which of the revenue streams are the most important at the moment, and have they drastically changed since the crackdown started?
Yeah, so gaming is still very important for the company, but I think the management also realized early on that they could not solely rely on this. So it's been many years in the making where you do see the company shifting its strategy, trying to diverse its revenue streams. Advertisement has been one of the areas that they're trying to go into. Cloud computing is another area. So gaming revenue has come down, but it's still significant.
Okay. And which other revenue streams are significant than the gaming?
Right now, there's a lot of expectation, hoping that the cloud business can grow at some point and compensate. Advertisement, obviously with COVID and the recent setbacks in the economy, isn't growing as fast, but that's always been an area where the company wants to grow.
Yeah. And just as a fun fact, just how influential Tencent is in the global gaming market. The biggest gaming company or like gaming development company, even in Finland, is mainly owned by Tencent. So, you know, just in case how influential you think it is globally, yeah. So yeah, Clash of Clans actually comes from Finland. So, well, there's Vikings fighting, like. Anyway, but going back to the topic, can you tell us a little bit more about how Tencent has deployed capital over the years? Which of those have been successful, which have not been very successful, and is there like an asset now somewhere that they, you know, that is a bit too hot potato?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So Tencent, if you study the company history, there was a drastic shift in their strategy in terms of how they deploy capital, because in the early days they wanted to compete with everyone, and so they earned this name as being a startup killer, a copycat. Right around 2010, 2011, that's when the company really went through this self-reflection period and started to realize a company of this scale where you have close to a billion users, what you should be really doing is deploying your traffic and aiming it at services that you want to empower. And also, instead of competing with everyone out there on the street, you have so much money from gaming revenue, why not try to become a startup incubator by seeding other people that you see that might become competitors. At its peak, Tencent has invested at least 800 companies, and dozens of unicorns were born out of this investment strategy. Two of the companies I mentioned in the book, Didi and Meituan, were both backed by them, and that was because they were fighting this battle with Alibaba affiliate and Alipay, and they needed to use these high-frequency app services to attract more users onto their WeChat platform, and that enabled the mobile payments business. These companies that I just mentioned, like Meituan, Didi, they were quite essential as part of its strategy to promote WeChat during the mobile era. And now we're coming to this era where I'm sure you've seen the news where the company is divesting its stakes in both of these companies. Maybe the follow-up question is whether Tencent will still be as acquisitive and will still invest in companies. My personal understanding is that the company, you have to think about their core business, which is still mobile, which is still gaming. And the company will not stop in terms of expansion in that area because that is their bread and butter business. And if you look at last year, they were still the world's second most acquisitive company when it came to gaming. The other businesses like Meituan is in food delivery, Didi is ride hailing. That part is increasingly coming under the inspections or scrutiny, especially with the antitrust laws that are happening. Just yesterday, China issued this draft law where they are putting internet platform companies as part of the inspections for antitrust. So I think it's reasonable to expect that they won't be as all-encompassing and all cross-platform going forward when it comes to investing.
Earlier you mentioned that cloud computing is one of the main revenue streams for Tencent, and obviously they have invested in that. Has that turned out to be a good investment? And then, competition from companies like Alibaba, is it still, a good investment for Tencent?
Yeah. Cloud computing, they built in-house, and largely it was to service their own internal services. This huge computing power was born out of the need to facilitate their gaming services, the WeChat services, and somewhere along the way, management thought, we have all this computing power, why not offer it as a service to other people? And the first services that, there's specialized cloud services, so cloud was their stronghold always. If you look at Alibaba, their gaming service, their cloud service is more catered towards small and medium e-commerce companies. Sorry, what was the second part?
That has it turned out to be a good investment?
Right. I think it's been a good investment because industrial enterprise technology is something that investors right now have formed a consensus that is still safe to invest in. So anything that relates to enhancing industrial output, and you could argue that cloud technology does help with that. The more sensitive part is about the data part of the business, and we can get into that later, but when it comes to how do you regulate data, how do you store data, whether the data is transferable across borders, who's using the data, who owns the data, that's all very sensitive right now, and I think we're going to see more regulations coming down in the future to provide more clarity and coding all of this into the law in terms of how companies can regulate the operations of data.
In your book, which is, by the way, available over there for purchase after the event, and those of you watching online, you can order that online, and it also made to the shortlist for the FT business books. In your book, you called Ma and his, colleagues idealist geeks who initially wanted to change the world, and now they have become part of the system that they wanted to change. Could you explain what do you mean with that, and then what does it mean in general?
Yeah, what I mean by that is there's inherent bias towards Chinese entrepreneurs often, where you think that because they were operating, I'm talking about the internet entrepreneurs, you can argue that they had an advantage because they were operating behind a great firewall, which did to a certain extent help them against companies like Google and the earlier internet companies like Yahoo. That said, if you look at these people, and in the book I go to a great detail about how brutal the battles were in the early days just against their fellow entrepreneurs in China. I don't think that any of them started out thinking, I am going to become a great surveillance app for China. That was definitely, no entrepreneur starts out like that. And so these people, Pony Ma's own background was a programmer, and Jack Ma was an English teacher. Cheng Wei, he graduated from school, could not find a job, worked at a foot massage parlor for a few months till he struggled and just very fortuitously worked at Alibaba before he founded Didi. So when they started out, I think these people genuinely wanted to create businesses that would make an impact. Somewhere along the way, they did get so big, and Chinese internet in the past was more of a hindsight back in the 1990s for the government, because if you think about how the society is formed, and for the government, they need to control key resources. Back in the 90s, it was controlling sectors like oil, like natural resources, transportation. Internet was never a huge thing. It was a hindthought. But when you fast forward 2 decades, and we're at this point where data is the new oil, than for a state like China, where the Communist Party needs to control the means of production, which is a very Marxist kind of thought. But if they need to control the means of production in society, and data has become a significant, important resource and means of production, then it would be only natural and logical that they need to rein in the companies and have better oversight on what's happening with the data.
Do you think there will be these idealist entrepreneurs in China in the future? And, and do you think there will be similar innovation ecosystem? Because a lot of technology applications that we now see in West, they were actually first here in China and Asia.
Yeah, so the model that has incubated so many entrepreneurs that are now listed on the NASDAQ and here in the Hong Kong Stock Exchange has really been this money trail, weaving US money, endowments, pension funds with GPs that focus on China and the best entrepreneurs that come from a mass base, and then they battle it out, and you invest in the cream of the crop gets the list on stock exchanges. That money trail, as of now, has not gone away. I was at our New Economic Forum recently, and if you talk to the VCs on the ground that are China-focused, taking money from the US, the total amount of money that is deployed to this region, this part of the world, has not gone down. The number of GPs, the number of VCs and PEs that the LPs, the big, well, let's call them institutional money, is backing, the number that they're supporting is going down. So I think part of it comes from being risk averse. We are in a down cycle, so they're only backing names that are established. And then for the VCs, they're still investing very actively for early stage companies, seed companies. Where it's challenging these days is the growth stage companies. After you get to Series C, because we were in such an amazing cycle, everyone was a genius. Valuation really has been inflated. So for companies at that stage, it's much harder to raise money right now. And I don't think that situation is going to go away. For China, it's the same issue. The other thing that needs to be solved is there have been no exits for all these startups. We need to look, like the signs that people are waiting for is when China resumes, China and the US resolve their auditing issue, and then companies can actually start listing on the NASDAQ, the NYSE again. Because if there's no exits, investors are not getting their money's return, and it's all paper money and worthless at the end of the day if you can't find an exit strategy.
Well, if you're now like an early career or early stage entrepreneur in China, especially in this technology area, how is it at the moment? The competition is still fierce, but then there is more and more restrictions, and then the economic growth prospects will certainly different than they were 5 years ago or 10.
Yeah, so if you're doing your own startup right now, the number one priority is to survive. And to survive, where is the money coming from investors? The consensus right now, there is a firm consensus in terms of what sectors are still safe to invest. Industrial technology, anything that enhances productivity, and then climate tech. So EVs are still safe, relatively speaking. If you're, and then I think the other part of the question is, what does it mean what is the dynamic with dealing with the government right now as an entrepreneur? If your goal is to become a billionaire, then I think that era has come and gone. And that's why we're seeing this migration of Chinese entrepreneurs, wealthy billionaires migrating to Singapore right now. My own opinion is that the government doesn't like a structure where you have this class of billionaires and trillionaires at the very top, where their economic aspirations can become political. But it has not turned against entrepreneurship. In fact, a healthy mid-sized population, middle wealth population, is still desirable. So industrial tech, in a sense, is also fits that profile because it's very hard to get amazing valuations for B2B technology. But if you're doing platform economy, then which is what created Alibaba and Tencent, that's where the high multiples come from.
Yeah. Well, now to the part that everyone is probably here for. Is the crackdown on tech companies over? Just last week we saw there was one column in one newspaper, and we immediately saw a reaction at the Hong Kong stock market. So everyone is waiting for the news. So what is the latest on that one?
Yeah, there's a lot of hunger for any signs that the crackdown is over and that China is refocusing on the economy. There's a few milestones that I would personally look for. One is Ant Group going to hand in its financial holding application, and when is that going to get approved? Because the Kickstarter of this, the whole thing, I guess the trigger or the first signs of the tech crackdown that started all of this was with the canceling of Ant's IPO. Even though the regulations were in talks, were in motion for months and years ahead, that was what global investors looked at as the first signs of the crackdown. And then the other thing is, when is Didi's service going to be resumed in the mobile app stores? The third thing is what I mentioned before, the auditing talks, and when are we going to start see companies listing again? These are very easy to spot signs, but if you can reach that milestone, it means that there's a whole train of thought or a whole motion that's taking place to get these companies to that point. And if you cannot track the day in, day out, tiny little regulations that are rolling out, if you cannot track this and differentiate it from the whole cottage industry of people who are making fake WeChat photos and fake WeChat screenshots about market positive news, then look for those three indicators.
Yeah, as a fellow financial journalist, I must ask. So this is the time to read reliable news sources and pay for them, because we will not be publishing fake WeChat stories or screenshots. So because the Tencent got very badly hit with the a restriction on how many hours per week children in China can play video games, and then some of the market analysts were like, okay, this is the end of Tencent. Has that had, what kind of effect has that had? If we don't look at the Hong Kong Stock Exchange now, but overall the company.
So the wild growth for that company is, I think that era is over, and not just because the gaming industry is under a lot of pressure and scrutiny right now, and kids can't play. As a company right now, I just don't think they're incentivized to create 50% margins and profit margins anymore. In fact, even if they are still creating that kind of profit margin, it probably would make sense for them to deploy that money into investing as of now, so as to not be so blatantly profitable as compared with their fellow SOEs. Because the theme of our times is common prosperity, and you just don't want to stick out as like a sore thumb. The other trend that I think that might happen that hasn't happened yet is that people are still waiting to see what comes out of the regulations, the crackdowns. They're here to stay. These methods and policies that have been issued are here to stay and will be coded into law and stay as a long-term status quo. But people are waiting to see whether this is the tail end, and there is talks and deliberations about whether it's worth spinning off some of the international pieces of businesses, whether you can carve out or firewall some of the purely international focused businesses. You can see that ByteDance has also created a U.S. focused overseas focused e-commerce company. So spin-offs from big internet companies that are purely focused on overseas business, that could become another trend.
Yeah, I think TikTok is leading the way by having two completely different versions. Then looking into the future, how do you think Tencent is doing with the Web 3.0 or the overall application of the blockchain technology, minus the cryptocurrency? Yeah, besides cryptocurrencies, there are many other applications of blockchain technology. So how is Tencent geared up for that? And is it maybe going to become like 7 cents at one point?
Well, Tencent and Alibaba are not anti-blockchain. They're anti-cryptocurrency. The irony is that, when crypto was first created, these were people who were libertarians and anti-anything government related. And like with all technology, big corporations have stepped in, governments have stepped in to utilize this technology and create it in their own vision, mold it in their own fashion, which is why if you talk to the Bitcoin early adopters, none of them like FTX because they don't think of that as pure crypto. That's something completely different from what they envisioned. And so if you apply that logic to whether this is going to take off in China, then the answer is no, because everything about it is libertarian and anti-anarchism. But they can leverage the technology and use it to do something else. So the form will be very different. The Web3, everything about the Web3, as we know right now, is trying to disintermediate big corporations, disintermediate government agencies. Your wallet is basically, you can use it and go and pay for services on the internet while still remaining anonymous. I don't think that chimes with what the government wants in China. So maybe they will have a Web3, but in my opinion, that has nothing to do with what I consider to be Web3 or crypto.
Okay. We would like to now open the floor to questions from the audience. So does anyone in the audience have? I can see already a few hands raising. If we could get, and when you ask your question, please state your affiliation and please be kind and keep the questions short so we can have time as many questions as possible. So yes, please.
Hi. Thank you, Lulu, for an interesting talk. I'm Dorothy Chen. I'm actually curious I have two questions. The first one being, how much of a threat are companies like Animoca Brands, who has been pushing the decentralized version of gaming, or putting the power in the gamer's hand, as opposed to being dependent on Tencent and Co. For games? Like, how much of a threat are they? And the other part is, I want to go back a bit more on the common prosperity theme. I know Tencent put aside like $7 billion for the ESG fund, but will we, like, in your view, should we expect something more from them, or they're expected to do a bit more, sort of similar to what JD.com had to do the other day, where the management cut their salaries to give back to their employees? Just love to hear your thoughts.
For Animoca, I think the main criticism I've heard for them is that the games are not as enticing as your traditional AAA titles. I think when they get to a point where they can create games that are actually as on par with your League of Legends, then the incentives are okay, but because basically what they're doing is you play my game and you can earn my coins, right? And as long as their coins don't evaporate and become an FTS situation, then there's always incentives for more gamers to join. My verdict on whether like the whole system where you actually have to pay first in order to join the system to play. I think it depends on whether the game is good quality or not. If it's not, then it's very easy to create very bad systems out of this kind of structure. Yeah, that's my answer. For whether Tencent needs to donate more, I think like they're already pretty active when it comes to donations. There's other ways that the company can align itself to appease regulators and align itself with the strategy of common prosperity, where they can, focus more on what the country is telling them to do, which is focus on economic industrial output instead of just. I guess some regulators would say that internet companies and fintech companies leveraged policy regulatory arbitrage, which is why that they're not really creating value, but just taking away the cheese from traditional SOEs. So there are ways that they can align their policies and strategies apart from just giving away money.
Okay. Any other questions from the audience? Yes.
Hi, my name is Ophelia, member of the FCC. Do you get the sense that companies like Tencent or Baba can continue to grow in the current regulatory environment? Or also if the government policy is really trying to get these guys under control and let other smaller guys to grow to compete with Baba and Tencent?
I think the intention is not to kill off Tencent or Alibaba. The fact that they're very big in their respective industries means that it's easier for regulators to monitor and supervise these companies rather than play whack-a-mole with 10,000 companies. Also, the more just as a question, ask yourself, do you still use Alibaba services? Are you still using Tencent services? If you are, and I think many of the people sitting in this room and also definitely in China are still using their services, then this company is not going to die. There is still room for growth.
Okay. Any other questions? Let's see. Okay. I see one hand. Oh yeah, sorry, because I can't. One from the back, and then we'll move. There, yeah.
Hi, I'm To Han Shi, Chief Analyst of Headland Intelligence. Hi, Lulu. I have two related questions. One is, do you think the Chinese government's restrictions on companies like Tencent and Alibaba will kind of impede or slow down or hurt the overseas influence of these big companies like Tencent, so that they will have less of an impact in international markets? And if so, do you think it's hypocritical of some politicians in America or other Western countries who say, China's this evil imperialist menace using companies like Alibaba and Tencent to conquer the world?
The question of whether their businesses have been hurt, I think, yes. Right now, there's discussions in the US about completely shutting down TikTok, purely on the fact that based on accusations that this company is stealing data from users and giving it to the Chinese government. Back in 2015 to 17, Tencent really wanted to export WeChat to overseas users, and they really struggled with it. I think part of it is because global users have this concern about their privacy, about their data. And later, we've reported about this before, users, even overseas, have been shut down in terms of when they communicate on the platform and their accounts got locked out because they were passing on sensitive information. So if you have an image issue, this isn't, well, the reputational damage has already been done. So transferring anything that's data sensitive overseas, especially to retail end users, is going to be problematic for these companies. It's probably less sensitive for a company like Shein, where they're just selling clothes. But if it's related to technology, then yeah, I think it's going to be challenging.
Okay, and gentleman over there.
I'm Will Hay. I'm a private equity lawyer here in Hong Kong. The entrepreneurial community in China is clearly facing serious headwinds. And I've seen people in my circle, Chinese entrepreneurs or would-be entrepreneurs, moving offshore, either with their money or individually. And do you see this? What do you see of this trend? And do you think, if there is such a trend, do you think it will reverse as policy changes in China, or is this going to have more long-lasting effects? Thank you.
So I think right now what we're seeing is that we're only seeing the top-notch Chinese entrepreneurs moving their money out in this current wave, and they're booking their accounts in Singapore, but that's not far enough. So the money is also stored in Switzerland. Physically, they might have relocated outside of the country, but I don't think that they will, what I've heard is that the idea is that they might be relocating to Singapore for the time being, but the moment when the country opens up, there is still the possibility that they will go back. So while we're seeing this migration of wealth where they're trying to protect their assets physically, not all entrepreneurs that have managed to leave the country have abandoned the country yet, and there is the possibility that when China opens up, people will return.
Now I have a follow-up question. Do you think they will be welcomed in, by open arms by the government? Because, when the times get tough, and then if you go, then once you come back when the times are better, how do you think the government or the fellow ecosystem is going to view that? I mean, it's purely speculation.
Well, as of now, I don't think the government actively cracks down on people or faults people for leaving the country as of now. As long as you're not politically active and not vocal, then there's a thriving community of businessmen in Singapore where they have their assets parked there, but they still have many ties with the mainland, and as of now, that has, they're not getting faulted for that yet. There is talk about wealth taxes or even chatter about expatriation taxes when these people leave, but we haven't heard anything concrete or anything that suggests that is definitely coming down the line.
Okay, yeah, well, you'll be here after the, yeah, okay. Gentlemen, you had your hand up? Yeah. Hold on, let me get you a microphone.
Martin Sabai, I'm an associate member. It's partly been covered by your previous answers, but do you think that Tencent, in fact, could succeed internationally, not through WeChat, but from the gaming, which does seem to be world-class? Could you say a bit more? You mentioned that they might have spin off something. Could you give us your view on how that might be achieved, and is there really a depth of management there? Because so many of these companies are very associated with one man. Do you think they could really compete internationally outside the protection of the firewall?
Yeah. For Tencent, they've already achieved international success with gaming. Riot Games, which they bought, runs League of Legends, and they own it 100%. PUBG was a very successful game outside of China. They imported it and then created the mobile version for that, which has done well. Arena of Valor, which is the mobile version of League of Legends, huge success, massive success in China, exported it, and I think they're doing okay in regions like Southeast Asia, not so much in the US. So I think Tencent has a very good chance of, well, they have the expertise and know-how to make AAA mobile games already. The other question about whether they can succeed outside of the firewall. So the few examples or the few models that I've seen where Chinese companies go outside of the country, you can do your Xi'an model or Xiaomi model where you're selling pure products, hardware, items, piecemeal, and then there's TikTok, but there's only TikTok. They've actually managed to create a retail product that is loved by US teenagers. And then there's another model that I'm seeing emerging, which is where you see companies like Ant. They invested in this whole network of mobile payments for Alipay in Southeast Asia, originally to follow the Chinese diaspora and the Chinese tourists, where China used to have 150 million people going outside of the country every year. So when they go outside, they will scan Alipay and then pay using basically their wallets. It's not Amex or Visa that they use. And because they invested in all these local wallets in Southeast Asia, like Gcash, and then also in Korea, like Kakao. So these companies right now, if a Korea user wants to go to the Philippines, what they can do is they can scan the Alipay QR code and then pay through using the Alipay network. So this business is purely overseas to overseas, nothing to do with China. Potentially, a business that could lure more local wallets and merchants to pay for it. Still very early days, but it is a different business model from everything that we've talked about before. Yeah, I think there is like green shoots and all kinds of these different areas, and it's not like a black and white, yes, they'll succeed, no, they'll not succeed kind of situation.
Okay, and I saw a hand up over there.
Hi, I'm Edith Terry, former journalist. My question is actually twofold. The WeChat ecosystem in China is very powerful. It's incredibly inclusive. Its only real rival competitor is Alibaba and Alipay. So I just wondered if you had a comment on sort of the future of the Tencent ecosystem within China. Has it already reached maximum penetration and innovated, as much as it will? The second question is other Tencent businesses. And correct me if I'm wrong, but when Wanda went bust, Tencent came to the rescue, and I think they ended up with some of the Wanda assets in China. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe it was just a capital infusion. But whether that, leaving that aside, there's Tencent Literature and Tencent Music Entertainment, I think is the name, which are incredibly robust businesses within China and have also made some effort to move out of China, particularly in Southeast Asia. I just wondered if you had a perspective on the health and potential growth of those businesses.
For the music and
literature. Right.
Okay, so the first question was about
the WeChat, WeChat ecosystem.
Yeah. Well, WeChat definitely has surprised me over and over again. So I'm not gonna try to predict whether it's reached its in terms of the kind of services it can provide. Originally, it was just a WhatsApp service, and then they managed to add the social media piece of it, so it became more like Facebook. But then they managed to add the what do you call it? The service that allowed it to become where you can actually issue news accounts and company accounts, and it became more corporate friendly and also in a sense, became a news platform as well. And then eventually they added the light apps, which has really enabled it to become more connected with real-world services. And the latest battle that they're fighting right now is with TikTok, with the short videos. You can argue that this is very, it's very internally competitive, and it's not really looking for growth on a different kind of level. We have yet to see the next kind of blowout innovation come out, or micro innovation come out of WeChat that would just bring them to a whole different level instead of just competing with existing players in the sector. But you know, this is a product where the creator Alan Zhang has surprised people over and over again. So I think the verdict is still out, whether they can have a 3.0 version or a third chapter for WeChat.
Okay, we have time for one more very short question and a very short answer, and then after, yeah, so it could be, yeah, the microphone.
Thanks. There's still more to do there. Mark Michelson, consultant, longtime FCC member. Broadly in China, domestically, tech and innovation clearly high priority, even more so with the U.S.-China conflict and everything else going on. Will the crackdown, do you think, on the Tencents, on the Alibabas and so on, will this have implications for broader competition going forward?
As in, will it hurt innovation?
Yeah, will it hurt the development, do you think? Because for entrepreneurs and for innovation, it's very important to be not completely free, but you know, have a fair amount of space there to develop.
I think in order to have innovation, you need many factors to work, and what has worked for China up till now is that it has a huge population that is well educated, so a large base of programmers. There was a vibrant ecosystem in Beijing, Shanghai, Hangzhou, Shenzhen, that community of people where they could brainstorm together, the right capital incentives where you were financially rewarded very generously if your products resonated with the public masses. And so all of those systems need to be in place in order to create your own Silicon Valley version equivalent. Right now, with the economy going into slowing down, and then also massive layoffs, I think it's a setback. But the knowledge, the talent that's been accumulated is still largely there. Whether the crackdowns will have a significant effect on innovation and the whole ecosystem, these things take time, probably even a generation, because you need to wait for the kids that are being educated today to grow up and then see whether they are still on par with their entrepreneurs from 10 years ago, and these things take time. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. May we have a big round of applause to our speaker. And we won't let anyone leave FCC without a little FCC souvenir. This has been FCC Lunch Talk. Thank you everyone for coming, and thank you Hong Kong Foreign Correspondents Club. It has been my absolute pleasure and my honor. Thank you.